podcast 6 with John Ting. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Austin. Thanks for having me. Good to be
John,
here.
I think you're the first person
Yeah.
not born in the US to be on this podcast. I might be wrong. Maybe Alan is. I'll have to check with Alan. But I think
Oh, okay.
that you're the first one not born in the US. So I know you grew up. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? When you moved here, where you moved from, and intro to everyone.
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting you brought it up. Yeah, I'm John. I was born and raised in Taiwan, Taipei. Um, I've been there since until I was 12 years old. So basically, I finished elementary school, sixth grade, right? And
Mm,
then my family, because my dad serves full time,
mm.
so he through some fellowship uh, he was to come to serve in the U.S. in a church in San Francisco. So I never thought I would move to the U.S., but yeah, I guess
Is that seen as like a promotion in Taiwanese society? Like you're going to the US, or is it
Mhm.
not really so?
To some extent I believe so. Yeah,
Mm,
it's kind of rare that someone in right some young kid right in his like he's barely like 13 years old will actually
mm,
go to the US and just stay there for the rest of his life. Yeah, and and that kid happens to going with his family too. It's not just that he's going by himself,
right.
because it could be that some rich family has some money, they send their kids abroad, but then
Mm,
I guess our whole family went.
I
But
see.
I knew early on it wasn't. I never knew that was gonna happen, and I knew. I mean, I'm not sure. I think it's from the Lord. Yeah.
I
My
see.
understanding was that the fellowship with my dad and some of the brothers in Taiwan was that we were gonna go somewhere else actually besides the U.S. We were gonna go like to South America or something. There was some like
Oh wow.
saying, yeah, I think like I forgot which country. I'm sorry, is that Paraguay or like because there's Brazil, because there's Chinese speaking saints there. I'm sure if you
Mm,
know, there's a lot of. I think Brother Lee has some. The ministry was there, and then
right.
some of the saints were raised up, and then they were immigrants. In Brazil, there's a lot of Japanese, later on Asians,
I did not
Chinese.
know that. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Oh,
so is
I see.
Korean actually. Yeah,
So
we
for
were
those
gonna go to
listening,
South America.
for
Sorry.
those listening, John grew up in a pretty spiritual household, right? I think ever since you were born, right?
Right. Yeah, I was. Of course, it wasn't my choice, but yeah, So because my dad serves full time, right? So we. Um, Actually, let me backtrack a little bit. So
John, you're running this on your own. Go for it.
I'm sorry. Hey, stop me anytime, all right, Austin. You guys, you're the host. Please,
Okay, okay.
I
But
defer to you.
what does it mean to serve full time? For those who like
Yeah.
listening, they might not be sure. Clearly he's doing a job full time. We'd say like
Correct.
you have a full-time job. But what does it
Right,
mean to serve full time? He's not a slave, right?
right. I mean, depends on how you look at it, but yeah. I don't think we'll get into that, but I think, yeah. So, uh, there are, I guess in Christianity, there are people who are pastors, there are missionaries,
Mm,
and that's their job, right? And even legally speaking, it's a category of job, and they have certain tax protection, exemptions, whatever. But so I would say the closest thing probably to the meaning of serving full time will probably be like, yeah, my dad is a pastor at a certain denomination or at a church. It'll
mm,
probably be the same. It's the same idea.
right.
It just so happened that in the meeting that I attend, or in the church that I kind of grew up, we call the quote unquote pastors or people who are involved in that role full timers rather than pastor or missionaries.
Mm. We
But
might go into that a bit more
mm,
later, but I wanted to
there is
talk
a meaning
about.
behind it, though. Yeah, yeah,
Right, yeah. I wanted to talk about when you first got to the US. There's still
yeah.
some, I think in church, well, now that we're talking about church, there's still some immigrant families that come over. They're moving around, right? And their kids
Yes.
grow up. They might speak Chinese at home, but in school they gotta speak English. Were you ever bullied or ran into difficulties or felt you were behind because of
Mhm.
that experience?
Yeah, definitely. As an immigrant, as a 13-year old kid in the public school system in San Francisco, and yeah, it wasn't easy, because I barely speak English, and yeah, especially the first year, it wasn't easy. Yeah, I wouldn't say I was bullied, but I was definitely picked on. It
Mm.
was, a lot of,
How do
you
you
know,
differentiate the two, picked on versus bully? What separates the two?
I think bully is more, uh, uh, is a more aggressive form of picking on someone, because I'm usually singled out because I don't speak English. I was laughed at, but I wasn't necessarily, uh, what's the best word? Deprived of my happiness. People will laugh at me, make fun of my accent, repeat the words I say in my right pronunciation, things like that.
They
So
would still be friends with you or try to, they're still open to talk to you, things like that. It's not
yeah,
like,
yeah, we
right,
would
right.
still be friends. Yeah, but it
Mm.
was more like making fun of. I
Pick
was
on
more
you.
make
Yeah.
fun of,
Right, right.
not so much bullied. And it kind of became a part of my growing up, I guess. So I feel I can take some criticism and take some like
Mm.
yeah, some offenses and things like that. I kind of take it a little lightly than most
Right.
people.
And
Uh,
then you went to the
yeah,
same school I did for college, right? Rutgers.
correct. Yeah,
Right? That's right. And then actually that's how I met you was because
correct. Yes, that's
yeah,
correct.
we're housemates. And so
Yes.
that's how we know each other. But when you were at Rutgers, you also, like me, studied history, right? And so I
Yeah.
guess now that you grew up in the U.S., you study U.S. history, and I guess in Taiwan you probably studied Taiwanese history or Chinese history when you were there. What do you think of all this controversy around Taiwan right now?
Mhm.
Like Taiwan's an independent country. Do you see it that way, or uh, what do you think about that?
Um, I guess the way I see it is that um, uh, Taiwan and China definitely has a very close uh, relationship in terms of the people, because we really came from the same family, quote unquote. We
Mm,
had this, like, my grandfather literally, but my paternal grandfather came from China, like from he's from China.
right.
And but then the way I always look at it is that, if you have lived in a place for so long, for multiple generations, right? And
Mm,
even though you might be ethnically or biologically, whatever that means, Chinese, quote unquote, right? You have the
right.
Chinese blood, but really your constitution, who you are, and your person, your upbringing, right, you are where you kind of grew up.
Mm,
And I think we can apply to being an American. I will never consider someone of British descent, or of a certain European descent to call himself, "Oh, I'm French, I'm English." I think they would just call
mm,
themselves American. And I
mm,
think the same should be applied to the people in Taiwan. Again, I don't want to get into the politics, whether or not that means these people are independent at a different country.
mm,
In a sense, I actually do believe that, because they've been there for so long. They are who they are,
mm,
even though they share the same kind of right blood and ancestor. But I think if you approach it in a more logical point of view, they are an independent group of people who has kind of their own culture.
let's approach
Um,
it from a historical point of view. So
okay,
What's
okay.
interesting with Taiwan is that it was given to Japan after China lost I think it's second or first Sino-Japanese War,
I
right?
think the first, yeah,
The first one. And then Japan held on to it until the end of the
50
Second
years,
World War,
correct. Yeah,
right? And then during that time, Japan made a lot of improvements in Taiwan, right?
correct.
So when we think of Japan, we think of Pearl Harbor as Americans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Suicide bombers,
Yeah.
kamikaze, and fight to the death kind of. But Taiwanese people don't really have a hostility towards Japanese people. Well, I
Yeah.
would just say some of them don't, right? They see Japan as like more helpful than China, right? In some ways,
Mm-hmm.
in building infrastructure and
Mm-hmm.
things like
Mm-hmm.
that, versus like we just see Japan as like a aggressive imperialistic power, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you get some of that in Taiwan, if like or no?
I will never get that. Well, I, I definitely sense a friendliness to the Japan and to the Japanese people.
Hmm.
And the reason I said that was, my aunt, my paternal on my father's side, my aunt married a Japanese, and one of my cousins, she only speaks Japanese and a little bit of English. And I personally have visited Japan a couple of times to see my
Hmm.
aunt and my cousin. And the sense I got was that we're like, we're kind of like the backyard of Japan. They still think that we're like, you know, we're like, close. And um, in terms of the Taiwan as a country, though, how as a whole it's feeling towards Japan. It's actually a little different because you had people like my paternal grandfather who's straight from China, right? Like he
That's
grew
right.
up in China, fought in World War II with Chiang Kai-shek, and then they moved to
Then they
Taiwan
came over, right?
and
Because they
came
lost the
over.
war. Yeah.
Yeah, and
John, you
their
jumped
view
in
of
ahead of
Japan,
me.
I'm sorry, yeah,
But it's okay. Their view of Japanese.
their view of Japanese is definitely bad. Like
Yeah.
it is rooted in their thinking. It is very hard to get rid of that for them.
Same with my grandpa. Yeah, hates the
Correct.
Japanese
Yeah.
to the core. Yeah. Never forgive
So
them.
they are actually a good, I wouldn't say the majority, but a good percentage of the population demographic in Taiwan.
Hmm.
And plus, their children, right? But then there are also like my mom, my mom's side of the family, they have been in Taiwan for at least 5 generations
Oh,
since
that's
like
like
the
my mom
Qing
too.
dynasty. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's right. Yeah.
And my maternal grandfather, he loves Japan. He in fact hates the nationalists that came from China when they lost the war. He actually looked
Hmm.
down on them because my maternal grandfather was raised by the Japanese, educated, right, by the
Right.
Japanese during the colonization,
Hmm.
and speaks fluent Japanese. Um, and if you talk to some of the people in Taiwan right now, some of them actually only speak Japanese still and only speaks
Oh.
Taiwanese.
Oh.
But of course, that's a little different. Now you might have to look for a little older generation, but that's the
Right.
case. Yeah, and they were kind of not buying too much into it when Chiang Kai-shek and his proxies in the army came from China.
Right.
They
So
were
this is
kind of
where
like,
this is where
mhm,
like I guess cross back into American history for the viewers. Right. We win World War II against the Japanese, right? So the Japanese have to give up Taiwan, right? But after the Japanese give up Taiwan, the nationalists and communists were still fighting a civil war in China,
correct.
right? And Chiang Kai-shek was losing. And I don't know like the details of it. From my grandpa's perspective, he says there were too many communist spies.
Hmm.
And so they had to retreat to Taiwan and kind of like
Correct.
filter out the people who were spies. If you're a spy, you can't get across to the sea, and then establish a new like defensive perimeter. There's always this dream, right, from mainland China that one day it will take it back.
Right.
That's my paternal side, right? That's my dad's side too. But
Yeah.
then my mom's side, they've been on Taiwan for years. Said maybe dynasty times, like 1900s, early 1900s, and so they see Taiwan as independent. They don't want to be associated with China,
Uh-huh.
right?
Uh-huh.
And then, but like here's the thing. It's like so I asked them when did Taiwan become an independent country? They usually say after Japan lost.
Mhm, mhm.
Does your family say that or no?
w-
I guess it's the political thing. You don't want to
yeah,
maneuver into.
yeah. It, it's kind of tricky because when Japan lost
Mm,
to the nationalists, China is still there. It's just that now
right,
the capital is in Taiwan, Taipei, not in Beijing or something. So there's still China, and the U.S. still recognizes Chiang Kai-shek as right the Republic of China
right.
until the 70s, or I can't remember.
1970s, yeah.
Yeah, when they okay, now we're gonna recognize People's Republic Mao as
Right.
the one China, and then Taiwan, and forget about Taiwan, right? Because so for a period of time, I would say, um, post World War II, when Japan lost,
Mm.
right, until 1970. Forgive me, I don't have the dates, but
No,
it's
it's that time because of Vietnam War. We wanted China to
exactly.
help us get out, right?
It
So,
definitely has to do with that a little bit, for sure. Yeah,
mm,
a big part. I'm sorry, not a little bit, but yeah. So during that period of time, we are still technically China, and there's not such a thing as Taiwan.
right.
Political, if you want to talk about, like,
The
politically
People's
speaking,
Republic versus
legally speaking,
Republic of China.
right,
Yeah,
right. We were still ROC, yeah,
right.
just
And we
Republic of
were
China.
sitting on the United Nations, right?
That's correct. Imagine that
Until
small island with the XL government is actually having the veto powers on the, yeah,
for against, yeah, for all of mainland.
oh
Right,
man, yeah.
right. So I guess from your perspective, then I guess it's until the 1970s. Taiwan is still the representative government of China, right?
I
But no, no, no. I know there's like there's
yeah,
other views to it too, right?
right.
For my mom, she says it started World War II. World War II Taiwan, like, and I'm like, but Chiang Kai-shek didn't establish a Taiwanese government, right? He was still thinking he was the rightful government of China,
Hmm.
all of China, right? But fast forward a bit to today, right? It gets murky, right? We don't want to get too political. Where there's a lot of different views on this, but today there's a push for Taiwanese independence,
Hmm.
right? Taiwan as an independent country.
Correct.
For me, the problem is, well, where did that come from, or what time did you, how did you become an independent country? Did you just vote, like do a referendum, vote, and then it's all right, 50% over, um,
Mm.
you're we're independent now? Because I feel like something with independence, it can't just be up to a referendum, because then if there's
I
never,
agree.
right, kind of like Brexit. You think of Brexit, right? They want to leave their European Union. Sure, you can do that. What are you going to do after that? Then 4 years of chaos, right? And so I think that I don't know how, like, what will come of the situation, but
Mm.
yeah, what?
I think to the Taiwanese people, those in particular who want independence,
Mm,
my understanding has always been that th- it's not just for the sake of, oh, I want to declare myself independent. Is that they want people to recognize them. They want the world to recognize Taiwan as an independent country. So that means they will be applying to join any kind of world organizations as a
mm,
country. They want to have that recognition. And to me, you can declare yourself as independent as much as you want, right? Someone might want to invade you, but uh,
right.
but it's how much people actually accept and recognize.
Oh, so we get into sovereignty, the idea of
Right,
sovereignty.
sovereignty, exactly. To me, that's the essence of this whole debate, right? Because
Mm.
yeah, I, again, I mean, we uh we can definitely talk about whether or not we are entitled to be, historically or legally, are we part of China or not. But I do believe, though, that it should have a way, it should have sovereignty to govern itself.
Mm.
Uh, yeah,
Well, I'll give my radical take on it. I still
sure.
think Taiwan is the real government of China. It's
And that
almost
some
like
people still believe that.
some
Yes.
people still believe that, not many anymore, right? And the reason I say that is because I find communists as usurpers. Again,
Mm,
I'm pretty radical in my view. I think
okay.
that with Chiang Kai-shek, he's kind of like, Charles de Gaulle, right? During World War II. He led
Mm-hmm.
the Free French forces, right? And the analogy I draw is like, if D-Day didn't happen, right? If Nazi occupied France for 100 years, right? D-Day just never happened. And then on the 101st year, Charles de Gaulle's descendant decided to come back and retake France, Would we count that? Would we count which government would we say is the legit government? I guess everyone, well, no one wants to say the Nazi government is legit, right? But I guess it's also because in World War II we took back France literally with after D-Day, right? And so we reinstalled the Free French government. But it's kind of like since China can't take Taiwan, Taiwan can't take China. This has just been like simmering, and it's just like embers of war. Like it's not an actual war, but it's still like in a war. So it's
Yeah.
this very like weird gray area. But I feel that
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
once Taiwan declares independence, I feel that it's already lost its historical narrative to China, because China can easily just say, "Hey, like when did you become an independent country?" And
Mm-hmm.
Taiwan can only say like, "Well, there's a popular movement to do so recently." And that's the basis on which we declare independence. But I find that's a very shaky um, way of going towards independence. But I don't know. That's
Mm.
that's my view. Like anyone who's listening, feel free to comment or put us down, whatever you want to do. But anything else you want to say more about that?
I think, yeah, if Taiwan were to declare independence, um, and if the world is willing to recognize it, I really don't see why not.
Mm.
And I believe, again, call me liberal, call me. I mean, we'll get into that later, but it, yeah, there's a legal argument, there's a historical argument behind everything. But to me, right now, as we live in the world of right, it's not just about that. I think it's about the whole world and how people look at the situation, and we need to recognize that, and not be so caught up with, oh, this is their war, this is my war, this is their tribal issues, and we shouldn't get involved, right? And I really don't think that we should be bogged down by it too much. I really believe that if the world is willing to recognize Taiwan as a country, it
Go
should go
for it.
for it. Yeah, it should go for it.
I
Maybe
see.
I'm too simplistic, but
Hey, it's okay. We're
yeah,
all entitled to how we see things, right?
yeah.
And so I guess the other hot spot in the world right now is Ukraine.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
People are saying with the US focused on Ukraine, like China might make some moves on
Right,
Taiwan,
right,
right? Do you
right.
think do you think that Taiwan is the Ukraine of China?
But yeah, I think there are similarities,
Mm,
from the, I guess, from the um, macro kind of point of view,
mm,
but it's actually quite different, I feel. In relation to the US, I believe there are more legal obligations that the US will somehow protect Taiwan more so than Ukraine. Uh, I
mm,
think there are some kind of treaties. Again, I don't have the details, but legally speaking, there are some kind of agreement between the two countries,
right.
which the U.S. recognizes. So again, I'm of the view that if a country chooses to recognize, right, we should just honor that. But anyways,
Mm, mm,
um, there are some kind of agreement, legally speaking, between U.S. and Taiwan. It's not an official bilateral, right, agreement, of course, because
right.
U.S. is not supposed to make that kind of agreement with Taiwan. But
Yes.
there is some kind of recognition. Whereas Ukraine, I believe the relationship, legally speaking, is only through NATO.
Not even through NATO.
Or maybe not even. Yeah, again, see,
Right.
I don't have that. So that's the first difference, right? And
Mm,
then if we look at it from so forget about the U.S., right? Forget about um, um, yeah, war per se. There's another difference. The difference is that um, uh, part there are actually people in Taiwan. Again, this is a little counterintuitive. There are people in Taiwan who actually still want, I want to say they want to be united, but they want to have a peaceful resolution with China.
Mm.
So, and this is I, again, I don't know the exact relationship between Ukraine and Russia, but my understanding could be very shallow. But my understanding is that the relationship with the people in Ukraine and Russia is that people have a hostility towards the Russian kind of government and
Well,
approaches.
they're
Yeah.
definitely not letting the Russians walk over them right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the same case with the Taiwanese people in terms of the popular kind of like I don't think you're gonna have, you know, militias rising up against China invasion,
Oh,
Chinese invasion. I really don't think people in Taiwan are willing to fight in that way. That's just my understanding, but I could be wrong.
okay. Okay. I
Yeah.
see.
So it's very tricky, like you said. On the one hand, they want to be recognized by the world,
Mm.
but on the other hand, if they do invade, I don't think the Taiwanese people are of the sort that, in general, of course,
Or
that
they're
they
more
would.
divided than Ukrainians,
I believe so, yeah.
right?
And
They're
they're
more divided.
slightly more, they're friendlier. They prefer the more peaceful route towards
Oh,
China.
even if they're attacked.
I, I I would say so, yeah.
Okay.
They
Okay.
will
From
give
it's
up
okay.
more easily. Again, yeah, they would
I
give up
see.
more easily. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, let's for those Taiwanese people listening,
I
you
hope
could
I
prove.
didn't offend anybody, but
No, it's
yeah.
okay. If John offended you, you could prove him wrong. So if China invades you, you better take your gun and fight off the Chinese paratroopers. All right. Well, I guess we'll leave behind Taiwan and Ukraine for a bit, and let's talk about we both approach things sort of from a historical perspective, or at least we have that in our way of thinking because we
Right.
both majored in history, right? So when I wrote my senior thesis, you were like my unofficial advisor in a way, or like mentor.
Oh, that's very kind of you. That's very kind.
Telling me what to do. And so, what did you write your thesis on?
Well, at that time when I was in school, it was like in the late 2000s, right? No, not like this. Yeah, before 2010, basically.
Mm.
I mean, even until today, actually, Rutgers is still very big on, women's study, especially women's history for the history
Mm-hmm.
department. So I focused my thesis on Chinese war brides. And basically, war brides are foreign wives of American soldiers,
Mm.
right? And these happens to be foreign wives from China. It's a group of immigrant women that history or people usually do not know about and has
Mm-hmm.
failed to pay any attention to. So we, at the time, it was an interesting topic as it relates to women's rights, women's history,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of relates to my background, right, a little bit. So
Right.
that was the reason I picked the topic.
You
And
understand the immigrant experience and
correct,
the
yeah.
living in two worlds, kind of. I see. I see.
Yeah, but my main approach through the whole project was from the legal perspective, mainly from the legislature perspective.
You went to DC, right?
Yes, so my goal was to see how the law changed over time.
Mm.
Because at first, right, these people were not even recognized. I was basically focusing on immigration law
Mm. Right.
against the Chinese, because you know the Chinese immigration law against the Chinese has not been pleasant since
Chinese Exclusion Act.
the
The Asian
Chinese
Asian
Exclusion
community
Act.
loves using that now to talk about
Yeah,
how Americans mistreated Chinese.
yeah,
Yeah,
and when
yeah.
you look at it, all the way from back in Chinese exclusion, which is like in the early 20th century, right? Or not even
1800s, 1800s.
late 19th century, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
back in the chains when the first group went to the West Coast,
right.
all the way until say let's not talk about today. Let's just say talk about until World War II,
Mm.
post World War II, because we're talking about war brides, right? We're talking
Yes.
about Chinese immigrant women who are married to American
GIs.
soldiers. Yeah,
Yeah.
GIs. These people, because the bare fact that they were Chinese, they're still under the same discrimination from this whole shebang of laws all the way back that rooted back to Chinese Exclusionary Act, even though they're American, West American GI. So that specific development of the law to recognize and to really realize that we cannot do this to American soldiers, uh, and we need to do something about the whole influences of the Chinese exclusionary policies, eventually led to a change in legislature. And my study was to focus on that history
Right.
and how before that changed, a lot of Chinese war brides, right, who were supposed to come into the U.S. suffer both bureaucratic as well as legal discrimination. Yeah, I didn't even get into how they were treated as a human being, but just legally and bureaucratically speaking, they were discriminated against for sure.
I think interracial marriage was prohibited in US, is legal until like 1940s, right?
In certain states, I believe, yeah, that had a law that, right, that prohibited interracial marriages. Yeah.
Do you think, I guess, more interracial marriages now, and not since then, from then until today, right? It's led to
Yeah.
a more accepting, I guess, environment or atmosphere for Asian Americans? Because, like, I guess that was the first generation. If let's say there was interracial marriage laws, right, that you can't marry across race, and that's the GIs after they had their foreign service, they met they got a girlfriend, and then they they decided to marry them, and then that would be the first generation of, like, I guess, the interracial marriage, right? Maybe people weren't
I,
accepting of that, but over
Mhm.
time, perhaps as, I guess, different groups of Americans mixed together, maybe this is like the melting pot idea. I guess people like stop thinking of in terms of like, oh man, why did you marry across race? Or it's not as stigmatized. Yeah,
Mhm.
do you think, yeah, do you think that
Yeah,
that's a thing?
I think that did play a part
Mm,
in to the eventual change of the law. But
mm.
according to my kind of study and research, what eventually led to the acceptance of these Chinese war brides was a strong lobbying for the rights of the GIs.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. So it
yeah.
wasn't
So
for,
realistically speaking, I mean, the idea of interracial marriages being more accepted definitely play a role. But in the bigger scheme of things, what kind of really hit home for the legislatures was, yeah, we cannot ignore these
oh,
wartime people.
I wasn't saying, interracial marriage then was still kind of like looked down upon, I think.
That's correct.
I'm
Yeah.
talking about today, even today there's still some stigma to it. People still tend to marry within within two people of the same race,
Sure.
right? And
Sure. Yeah.
it's I don't know, it's people, maybe not, it's not polite to talk about it anymore. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, why'd you marry a white person, or why'd you marry an Asian person?
Mm-hmm.
But like, I think that behind, when like gossip or like behind people's backs, or not directly to the person, but to, like, there's talk about that, right? That hasn't gone away.
I think
Would you say
so.
so?
Yeah.
Right?
I think so. Yeah. I
Right.
mean, if you no, I actually agree. Even until today, yes. I mean, there are shows, right? Like what's that? You go on YouTube. There's always what's that show that does social experiment? Was it
Social experiment show.
O'Reilly? Not O'Reilly, but there's always that show that they arrange something very weird. Like there's one episode that just you have a parents, Caucasian parents, and then you have
No,
they
I don't know
they
this show.
convince her daughter to they were actors, of course, bringing
Uh-huh.
an Asian to pretend that Asian actor guy was her uh fiance or something, and then they meet the parents, and then they shoot the interactions. Yeah, they're still
Wait,
today, like, yeah, this I don't know what you call those shows again.
I
I
don't
forget
know
what
either.
you call those. Those are like social experiment stuff.
John, you
Yeah.
probably watch more TV than me, so
Oh
You probably
wow.
have
I
a better
mean,
idea than I do. Yeah.
hey, just go on YouTube. You see one of those
Just go
shows.
on
Like,
YouTube. Okay, okay.
just go on YouTube. Yeah.
Just go on
There are
Google
things about like all kinds of things. Like you know
Asian
how
Caucasian brides. What do I find on YouTube?
type in social experiment, um, parents finding out daughter is dating an
Sure,
Asian.
that's
I don't
such a
know.
lot. Okay, okay.
Yeah, I'm not good with this
I'll
searching
do
stuff,
that in
but
my spare time. I'll do that in
yeah.
my spare time.
But they do all kinds of experiments, like there's one episode that does, right? Someone was
Mm,
extremely rude to the waiter or waitresses. How would other people react?
mm.
You know those kind of things? Yeah.
Yes, I think there was one. Well, I run into these things through news. I don't necessarily like watch shows for it. I think there was one where
Oh,
it's
okay.
like a business owner yelling at a Muslim customer, and this is like in
Right,
the wake of
right,
9/11, and
right,
then there was a soldier, a U.S. soldier who was probably deployed to like Afghanistan or Iraq, right,
right,
next to them. So they wanted to see the soldier's reaction, whether
right,
he'd be like, and then the owner was throwing racist insults, but this was all staged, right? They just
right.
wanted to see the reaction of the
Same as that show, right?
soldier, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, the soldier actually stood up for the customer, the Muslim customer.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, and then he was pulled aside and told, yeah, that was all staged. We just wanted to see your reaction and all that. I always find that's kind of it's kind of tricky. You kind of have to trick someone in order to get the true reaction, right? But I guess you kind of in tricking someone, you do see the genuine reaction. It's not a assumption of this person's going to be racist or this person's not going to be racist. You actually see what the person does. And so for like ideologies being thrown out there, it doesn't matter because
Agree.
you see on the individual case what the person
Agree.
does.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it for real. I mean, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I hate
social.
ideologies. I don't know about you. I
Yeah.
like I like things from the individual perspective. I always think the individual holds power over what they want to do.
Yeah, I think the masses or right, the popular, the people should really decide. Same thing with again Taiwan. Anyways, you should let the people decide,
Let
in
the
every
people decide.
let the
All right.
world will let the community
All right,
may it be
Woodrow Wilson. All right, self-determination, right?
I'm sorry, yeah, I'm too
No, it's
liberal,
okay.
too
But
liberal.
speaking about that, okay, I guess how we think we've talked about this among the two of us, right? How we develop our own way of thinking or our ideology. And the phrase we came
Okay.
up with is that because we grew up in the not Middle East, we grew up in the Northeast. We're kind of liberal in soul. Even if we're not progressive liberal, like we're fighting for climate change, minimum
Mm,
wage, things like that, we still have some liberal concepts within us that unconsciously we don't even realize, right? And
I
then
agree. Yeah.
we're liberal in soul, but we're have to be conservative in spirit. Was that what we say? Because in church, I guess it's more, well, we don't want to label church as conservative, but I guess people in the world see church as more of a conservative atmosphere, right? No, no, what's it called? Promiscuity, right? Girls,
Okay.
boys, kind of
Okay.
separate, right?
Separation. Yep.
Right. And then there's some social behavior, right? You're not supposed to I guess speak over people, debate, during meetings, whatnot. Um,
Okay. Okay.
I don't know what else is considered. I guess we see things as separate spheres, right? Guys have a role in church, and then women also have a role in
Mm,
church of what they're
mm.
supposed to do. So I guess that's what we came to the conclusion of. Like, I guess we're liberal in soul, but then our spirits, that conservative part of us, that's like, that runs against each other. Or do you see it that way? That these two things run against each other?
Um. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I
Oh, here's another
I'm of the
conservative
view
thing. Obey your parents, right? Children, obey your
obey your
parents in the
parents.
Lord, for
Yeah.
this is right. Right.
So
But
that
you
your
you were
days can
saying,
be lengthened, right? Yeah. Yeah.
right.
I I mean, I do agree there are certain quote unquote rules that we kind of follow,
Mm,
but I think they are not meant to be like our regulations or rules. I think they are just a kind of Ultimately, so I should put it like this. I guess ultimately we make a choice on how we kind of deal with these kind of uh, principles, right? And I say principle because it's easy to treat them as rules, but really they are for a bigger principle behind it. You know, a proper separation. The principle behind it is really that um, marriage should be for God's economy only. You know,
What do you
uh,
mean by that? Marriage should be for God's economy. So I guess because
yeah.
this people listening might not understand that. I guess this goes into like our church lingo, some
Okay,
terms that
yes.
we have.
Sorry.
But
Yeah.
like some
Mm.
people might think of marriage as like, I guess recently marriage has become like of love, right? You love someone, that's why you marry them. What does marriage have to do with God? I guess you can elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah. I think from a biblical point of view, all the way from Genesis, we go back to Genesis. Marriage was marriage was meant to, really, um, right. The charge to Adam and Eve was that they will multiply, right? They will multiply, and they
Mhm.
will inhabit, and their descendant will inhabit the earth. And
And it
it
reflected
was,
something on God's heart,
y-
right?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
because
It
for
was
God to say it is not good for man to be alone, that means he had to sympathize or had those feelings for himself too, right?
That's
So
true. That's true. Yeah, but
marriage is like, oh, but you were gonna say,
no, no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
oh, so like marriage is like a symbolic, like even though it's physical, like in our world, like you do get married to someone, right? It's meant as a symbolic of of how much God loves man, I guess.
There is that symbolic kind of right uh, uh, purpose and meaning behind it, but I was thinking more along the line of God. Yeah, God needs a group of people to become His you know duplication to basically become um, to right to duplicate himself
Mm.
in life and in expression and in function. Yeah, so he doesn't just need one person, he needs a group of people, yeah,
Mm.
who will really express him.
So that's how it relates to marriage, you're saying.
I believe so, yeah, because marriage is when, right, people coming together, right,
Two
it's
people.
two people, yeah, two
Yeah.
people, and then right, the goal is that family unit will be used or will be for God's expression. Yeah,
Mm.
they're coming together is not just that they love one another. I mean, I believe there's definitely an element of love, or else I don't think these two people will stay together.
Mm.
But the ultimate goal or the principle, quote unquote, behind their coming together is something more spiritual.
Even for people who don't believe in God.
Well, for I'm speaking strictly towards the meaning of marriage in general, from like a point of view, from my point of view as a
Mm.
Christian. Yeah,
Mm. I see. I
E-
see.
people can have their view on what marriage should be, right?
Right.
But as for me, and my understanding of the Bible, and
Mhm.
right, my understanding of the different portion of the Bible regarding marriage is really for God, for His expression, and for Him to really have a way to express Himself.
So I guess that's one way to look at marriage, or that's how biblically, I guess
Yeah, and because
it
of
should
that
be.
principle, we behave a certain way, because if
Yes.
we behave contrary or in different ways, we might, is most likely we will miss that purpose or the testimony part. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Mm.
So because we have a certain view, we have certain seeing and vision of what marriage or other things or other relationships are as a human being, or even in society, we behave a certain way to be in line with that. Yeah.
So I guess this brings up two things in my mind. One is
Okay.
going back to this liberal and so on conservative spirits. It's not that these values are being set as rules that we follow, but it's a principle, and then I guess it's meant to kind of guide you towards. It's not meant to be followed like verbatim or like every single case in your life. You got to follow this strictly, right? But it's kind of like um, you need to combine it with like use your judgment sort of, and then um, there's a deeper meaning or like
Mhm.
intention behind it.
Yeah,
But yeah, so with that,
I'm
the
sorry. Can I
one,
just say a little bit more on just
yeah,
to follow
say
what
say a
you
bit
said,
more,
right?
sure.
I'm sorry. Yeah, if you look at the idea of law, right, or quote unquote, you know, the Old Testament law, we have
Okay.
all kinds of law, regulation, rules, dietary law, how to offer, all kinds of stuff. And you look at it in the New Testament, law and rules are actually just meant to be, right. You kind of know this. This is right in Galatians,
Child conductor.
child conductor. Yeah, they're kind of like just a guy, because before the Lord, right before we have the Lord Jesus in us as the Spirit, we kind of need something outward to help us.
Mm,
But ultimately, the goal is not that we would just endeavor and strive to follow them with our efforts, and that's actually the flesh, right? That's the good part of the flesh. We endeavor and we're trying to achieve something, to think and thinking that that's making us a better person, but that's
mm,
pleasing God. But the goal of these laws is really eventually that we will kind of know in principle who God is in principle, who He is, because we can kind of gauge what He's after, what He like, doesn't like. But not just that, you know, it's so that we can be led, realizing that there's no way human being by themselves can fulfill these laws. Eventually, will be hopefully be led uh, to right to God Himself, to Christ,
mm,
who's the only one who can really, who's the reality of all the offerings, who is basically the one who will fulfill all these requirements in us.
mm.
Not just that we will fulfill them, but He's for God's economy, so we will be for God's economy.
So
We will be for God. Yeah.
you talked about this part of like the good part is even part of our flesh, right? Like
Yes.
the
The
will
true
to do
knowledge
good,
of good and evil, right? Yeah.
right? It's not just
Yeah.
evil. It's also there's all good is it's like a coin, right? Good and evil are just the same coin, but just two of the opposite sides,
Okay. Yeah.
right?
Okay.
And
Okay.
so I guess that one of my points was trying to get to this idea of liberalism, right? We say we're liberal in soul. I guess the idea of liberalism has evolved over the years, right? As Americans, we tend to be
Oh
more
yeah.
liberal,
Oh yeah.
right? But these days, there's like even there's a progressive form of liberalism, right? A
Oh
set of
yeah.
ideas espoused. I find myself, I'm like an old school liberal, like classic liberal. It's just like I want to
Hmm.
hear both sides of the story, and then I can come to a conclusion because
Hmm.
liberalism assumes that education, right? It makes a person able to judge what's good, what's truth, right? And so a person can come to a decision himself if he's educated in what to do. But I guess liberalism also has roots in utilitarianism, right? Greatest good for the greatest number, right? We want good for the world. We want good for many people, right? Sometimes it's not possible. There's trade-offs in life, right? But generally we want that. So this idea of
Correct.
good flesh, right? That good and evil are actually the same side. I guess that kind of I don't want to say undermines liberalism, but it sort of throws it into confusion in a way because it's like, well, what then? If good is not the intent or purpose and bad is not bad, we don't want to be bad, then what then is there, right? And you probably
Hmm.
point to the other tree, the tree of life in Genesis.
Yeah, it will be difficult to say that, of course, right, to someone who doesn't believe in um, a tree of life, or you know, the third option, right? If there's no good, no evil, or about the third. Some people just don't believe that, and it will be very difficult convince them otherwise, uh, to believe that this is another option out there. So yeah, it will throw people into confusion. I agree, but I I'm of the view that um,
This is pretty hard, huh?
yeah, I'm of the view that we we still can choose, kind of, right, because ultimately we had to make a choice.
Yes, right.
It could be between two options or between three options. So ultimately, it kind of comes down to the person.
Mm,
So if someone does not chooses not to believe in the third option, the way the way of life as we believe it to be, then I have to say, unless that person changes, that person will always be in the realm of good versus evil, sadly speaking.
okay. I guess
Yeah.
let's speak from my experience then. Let's For me, what frustrates me, I guess, is that spiritual matters, or like this tree of life, right? We have two trees in Genesis: tree of knowledge of good and evil, and tree of life, right? Good and evil, it's easy to for the mind to comprehend relative to life, right? You could go like, what is life if it's not good or evil, right? At least with good and evil, we know that some things don't do, right? And some things do. So what frustrates me is like, well, how, if we can't use our mind to comprehend um, life, then what is life in a way, right? In our church, we say life has to do with God's spirit and our spirit, right? Human spirit.
Yes.
And again, if some people might not believe there is a spirit or not, but I guess to someone who wants to understand this concept of life, why go for life instead of just going for good?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, there is, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's where you should go, right? It's not that, oh, we need to, uh, this is the best way, or this is,
Mm,
the only way. I mean, it is what we emphasize because according to God's point of view, that's what will eventually meet his needs. Someone who just living right and wrong, that person can be the perfect human being. Even that person could be very proper, and it could be very successful.
mm,
But we're of the view that God's point of view is not for that. We're not judging that person. We're not saying that that person is wrong and he will like be miserable.
mm,
But we're just saying that, yeah, that is great, but from God's point of view, that does not fulfill God's need.
mm,
And we want to make a choice to stand for God's need. You know what I mean? So we as a human being make that choice to not live and or stay in that realm, but rather we want to be in God's view. We want to not do, but we want to, be one with what he wants. So we make that jump. We make a difference in the emphasis.
mm.
But there's nothing wrong. I mean, aside from the fact that it doesn't fulfill God's need, there's nothing wrong with being good.
So you're
It's
using
just that
the
it doesn't fulfill God's need. Yeah.
right. So I guess what frustrates me is knowing, how do we know this is God's need,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how, like, I think there's a lot of different Christian churches out there. There's even more religions out there, right? And so if we knew for certain it was God's need, then yes, we can say that this is, I want, you can then make a choice whether this is, I want to go for God's need, or I don't want to go for God's need. But I guess
Mm-hmm.
maybe to like someone like me who didn't grow up in a church, they might look at this and go, well, how are you so confident that you
Mm-hmm.
know God's need, and that
Mm-hmm.
someone else who success, I'm not saying you're not successful, but that people who quote unquote don't follow God's need truly don't follow God's need. You know what I mean? I guess this goes back to the point I'm frustrated with. It's that there's no standard in which to judge spiritual things, right? With good and evil, I guess there's a standard in which like humanly we can judge, like law, like the law, there's a standard there. With spiritual things, like how do you know God's need, right? I think there's God's needs on two levels. One level is his grand narrative, right? From what he's been doing from Genesis until today, and he's going to continue doing even after we die or whatnot. But then there's what is God's need in my life mean, right? So I'm doing a
Mm,
podcast with you right now, right? How do I know that falls under God's need, or whether that's just something I want to do?
mm,
You know what I
mm.
mean? And
Yeah.
I guess you
Mhm.
can, for that, you can only really respond on your personal experience, because
That's true.
you
That's
feel
true.
you I guess you personally
It's a belief.
recognize,
Yeah, it's a
right, you
belief.
recognize
Yeah.
there's a need, that God has a need out there,
Yeah,
right? But then some people might not see that as matter of factually, right? Or
that's true.
right,
Some people
right.
might disagree.
Yeah,
Flat
exactly.
out disagree. Yeah.
So I guess what made you decide that there is God does have a need out there, and then
Mm.
um I guess how'd you come to this conclusion, or you decide to
Yeah.
live this way? This is a tough
Uh,
question because it strikes at core of, like, I guess this goes into meaning of life and all of that. So
yeah, yeah,
it's tough. It's a tough conversation.
yeah. And I will try my best to clearly articulate. But yeah, I don't think I'll do a good job, but I'll try. Um,
That's what this is here for. Yeah,
right.
we're trying
Okay.
to, yeah, get to the truth, get to the bottom of things. Yeah.
For me, is like you said, personal experiences. Growing up, since I was a kid, I have certain experiences where I realized I'm on the earth for a purpose, um, greater and bigger than just my own success or money, right? Or my personal perfection.
Hmm.
I
Okay.
realized that my being a person, my being alive, is not of myself, and it's not for myself, right? And it's
Hmm.
actually for something higher. And maybe I'll try to make it a little easier to understand it. I don't want to be too abstract about this, but um, as a Christian, right? At a certain point of Christian life, at least for me, I realized that maybe it has to do with my parents. I don't know, because they are full time. They are,
Full
yeah,
timers.
full timers. Yeah,
Learn the term, guys.
like we really live by faith. Um, growing up, I realized that there are certain things that happened to me, that people just never imagined could happen to anyone. I, I don't want to. Okay, I'll show you one example, right?
Mm.
When I was in San Francisco, um, right, we just moved there,
Right.
and then we were supposed to go to school, right? The public schools, and
Right.
public school is usually where you live, right? You go to a nearby school.
Yeah.
And I remember when, I don't know why, but we had to go to the Board of Education because I think I was late or something. When I got to the semester, I was too late. So we had to
Oh.
go to the board before we went to our school in the neighborhood. We had to get some kind of approval or something,
Oh. Okay.
so that we can go in. And when we went there, the person who was there, right? We don't know this guy. He just, yeah, I think he's like the one of the officers, and just he asked my dad, "What does my dad do? Or what does he do, right, as a job?"
Mm.
And my dad just told him he said he's a full time, but I think he said like for him to understand him, right? For the official to understand, he said, "I work for a church and I'm a pastor,"
Right.
right? He said that just so that he can understand. Um, and then later on, a couple more days, I was assigned to a school that's about 30 minutes north of my neighborhood.
Mm.
No one, it's impossible. And that school is supposed to be one of the best middle school in San Francisco.
Mm.
Every day my dad had to drive me and pick me up 30 minutes, so 1 hour. Whereas there's like two other public school next to my house.
Mm.
I knew, so this is just one example, kind of like a superstitious, kind of like a very small example, but
Mm.
there are things in my life that has happened to me that just confirm my faith in God, to make me
Mm.
realize that the reason I'm here, the reason I'm alive is not just for myself, you know? There's gotta be a
Right.
higher purpose. When I go to that school, this it's something happened. It's supposed to be for something, because I was not supposed to be there. I'm not
Mm.
supposed to be here speaking with you, you know?
Wow,
So
that's right.
I just realized that this gotta be something higher. That's all I know. That's kind of like the fundamental aspect of this whole
There's
belief.
got to be something higher.
There's gotta be
Mm.
something higher. We don't know
Right.
what exactly it is. We don't know, but I think in principle, that's what kind of caused me and led me to this point. Of course, from that point until now, there's a lot of things that has happened that confirmed, strengthened, and add to it, that strengthened my faith and belief in God and in His needs, and not just my needs,
Mm.
and which I get from reading the Word and the Bible and being with the brothers and sisters. But in principle, that's kind of like, you want to kind of boil it down to the roots, right? That's kind of what it
Right.
is. There's something higher that's sovereignly arranging our lives. And
Mm.
and as human beings, there's this saying, right? Like, it's very easy to forget about where you came from. You know, when people,
Forget your roots.
forget
Right.
your roots, right? And I'm of the view that maybe it's the way I was brought up, but I always believe that, yeah, it's very easy to forget where you came from. When you're successful, that's when you become proud.
Mm. Right.
But if you check with anyone, not just believers, even unbelievers, you ask them, do you think everything happening in your life is because you did something, or there's actually something higher that's kind of behind the scene? You ask anybody, not just believers, not just Christians, not just, people from our church, but you ask anybody. I think if they're honest with you, they will tell you, wow, I'm actually lucky just to be alive today.
Mm.
Like,
Right.
you can't just, like, even as a reasonable human being, you can't just be like, I'm here because I did it. I deserve this. Everything. No, like,
Right.
I mean, we're kind of brought up in a way that, yeah, we deserve everything. We're entitled to many things. We're Americans, we're the
Right.
richest country in the world.
Entitlement society.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
But to me, that's forgetting about your roots. That's forgetting
Mm.
about where you came from.
Right.
And that can apply to anybody, not just people who are immigrants, not just people who have a difficult background, but when you check with yourself and be honest with yourself and really realize that where you came from, you have to admit, you don't have to admit there's God, all right? But just from a deist point of view, you got to admit there's something higher than human being, than the world, in the physical realm.
Mm.
And what's that force is for? It's got to be something higher. It's got to be
Mm.
something that we probably would not understand in our human minds, in our logic, in our education. We'll talk
Mm.
about systematic racism. It's gonna be higher than that. It's not. We're not gonna understand it unless we, right, tap into a different source. And for me, I'm of the view that my faith has always led me to tap into the Christian source with the Bible.
I
Yeah,
guess where
that
I
higher.
am then is that I I feel that within each human being there is an innate um sense of purpose, right? In our world today,
Right.
there's like other influence like nihilism, right? There is no meaning, or like some people are they just believe that life does have no meaning, right? Or maybe we were just by evolution, we're just the results of successful genes being passed down
Uh,
generation,
Natural
and then
selection. Yeah.
sure, natural selection, you're just the most, yeah, I guess ancestors were most fit, and now society, you don't have to be fit. You invent your own meaning of life or things like that. But no, I do think that there's an innate sense of purpose within each person. whether that has to do with God or points that person towards direction of God, that I'm still
Yeah.
trying to figure out. And whether
Right.
people are misled by that sense of purpose to a religion or to God or to a spiritual um, environment, that I'm also trying to figure out too. Could it? I don't know what that is, but I kind of grasp what you're saying, but I guess just from a different or um, younger perspective, I guess. Maybe 10 years from now, I'll kind of get to your conclusion, but I don't know. I really, I don't know.
One thing I
Um,
do want to add, though, sorry to interrupt.
no, not at
Is it
all.
okay if I add something? Just follow up what
Go
you said.
for it. Sure, follow up.
That search, right? That search
Yes.
for something higher. Maybe we need to try many things before we find it. But
Yes.
the the pitfall is that people gave up on searching.
Ah, there's that too.
That's the issue. To a lot of the, I want to say younger generation because I'm also one of the millennials. I mean,
Well,
but
you're a millennial speaking to Gen Z here, so to the younger generation,
it
what would
is
you want to
so
say?
easy now to just give up
Mm.
on searching. When you search for something, you gotta keep searching.
And
You
there's a price to be paid, right?
absolutely, you're absolutely right. See, we know all these things, but in practice, in experience, in reality, we don't carry through because it's so hard, and we're so lonely because we don't have friends to help us. But somehow, if you want to find it, you gotta keep searching.
Mm.
I'm of the view that you can try many things as long as you stay alive. Please don't die, right? And
Or harm yourself. Don't
don't
harm
harm
yourself.
yourself. Correct. You should
Right.
try it, but you gotta keep trying. Some people try maybe for a couple of years and they gave up. It's like there's no meaning in life. Yeah,
Mm.
I tried. Well, how much did you try? Like, did you? Yeah, I mean, I'm not
Right.
blaming anyone. I'm not trying
Mm.
to be like I'm better than everyone else because I tried a lot more. But no, I'm just
You've
saying.
had times you've kind of given up or just take a backseat too, right?
I think so. It's only
Yeah.
natural for people to do that. It's part of being a
Right.
human being, right?
Yeah.
And we're not judging people because of that. But at some point, you got to get up and keep searching.
Mm.
And if you don't do that and you cannot convince others that you're doing that, and yet you're telling people there's no meaning in life, we should just do whatever, then it's very hard for
I don't
people
want
to,
to. You don't want to take the person's word. You shouldn't take the
yeah, you
person's word.
can't. Like, even if you want to, you can't. You gotta be like, unless you're of the same view of the person, but no, any reasonable human being or any reasonable American will not believe that, you know?
Mm. Mm.
Maybe I'm too old school. I don't know, but you gotta keep searching. You're gonna fail many times, but you gotta keep going
I think
until you
people who
find it.
don't believe in God, they have that view too. They're still searching. They might be.
Exactly.
They still have a goal too. Maybe
Then
they are
they should
more
keep going.
pursuant that way. Right.
No matter what you do, no matter what you pursue, as long as you keep going, at some point in your life, you'll find it.
Mm.
I don't know what that thing is for each person, but I am pretty sure that thing has to do with, if not God, a higher being, and
Mm.
if not a religion, at least some kind of spiritual source.
Let's go
Yeah,
back to this point
yeah,
of practicing what we preach, right? It's that we know a
yeah,
lot of things in today's world, right? And there's a lot of knowledge. Like there's a push in our society to be educated, right? Um, but carrying out that
yeah.
part, not many do. I'll give you an example, like
Okay.
the church, right? Where so it's supposed to be more than a community, right? It's almost like God's chosen ones in a way, the ones God called out, right? And I guess one of my favorite passages in the Bible is like I think the disciples asked Jesus like, um, no, I think Jesus first tells his disciple, when you were hungry, I gave you food to eat, right? When
Mm,
you were thirsty,
right,
I
right.
gave you a drink, right? I clothed you and all of that. And then his disciples asked him the question, how do we do that for you? Right? Or when did we clothe you? When did we feed you? When did we give you a drink? Right? And then I think the Lord's response was, in as much as you have done these things to one of these the least, right? So like to people around you, have you done these things? And then if you have done these things, then in a way you are doing it for
Right.
God, right? And people listening, they don't take it too extreme. Like just constantly doing things for yourself, doing things for other people, and not caring for yourself. I feel like I kind of have that tendency where I just like give 100% to everyone, and then like I myself, I'm kind of like not certain what to do. But I think the point behind the story is you kind of take care of God in a way by taking care of other people, right? There's two, I guess I'm trying to say there's two extremes. There's one that's just very selfish. You just care about yourself, very narcissistic, right? That's not good. But it's also not good just to completely care for other people. But there's this fine balance in the middle where the story exists, right? When someone
Mm,
else is hungry or thirsty and give them a drink, then you do it, right? And that's, you can do that in your life.
right.
And I guess during COVID, this goes back to why I started this podcast. I think
Okay.
from March 2020 until like just recently, maybe September of last year, I didn't really want to talk to people, right? You didn't see me at the meetings anymore. I just didn't want to deal with all that. I felt it was all very superficial, right? And not many people like during in college, I think I responded to a lot of people. I reached out to a lot of people. Not many people after I stopped reaching out to them, they also stopped reaching out to me, right? But there's some people that still reached out to me, right? That still cared for me. And then you were one of them, right? I think that even though I wasn't meeting, you came over like every once a month at least, right? And just
Mm,
came to talk, and we would have these talks about what to do, right? Um, and I don't know, like Andrew inspired me a bit to do the podcast. He wanted to more talk about political current events and apply history knowledge, right?
okay,
I think
Andrew.
you
Yep.
were you were behind it too. You know, I guess you're very consistent in that idea of each person has a purpose. You got to keep searching for it. Don't give up, right? And I had a lot of negativity inside me when I talked to you, I think, about church and
Okay.
life matters, but I don't know. You were there for me. So yeah,
Yeah.
not to
Yeah.
like, or not to, but yeah, thank you for that. You know, and I think that maybe there's still a lot to life. You know, who knows what happens tomorrow or next year. But I think in
Right.
this particular time period from March 2020 until September, you were there for me. So I don't know how God sees that, you know. I feel like when I
Mm,
talk to God, like God doesn't really I don't really get a response. But I feel that through people, I guess, I still, and not even through people, through some people, you know, like I feel that it's not even
mm,
that God's there, but just like, yeah, that was really nice. Or I really appreciate that, you know, that there's still someone that was willing to talk. So, yeah.
yeah. All I know is that, I had my hard times in life. I had my
Mm,
low points. I know God didn't give up on me, and I know some brothers and sisters from church also didn't give up on me.
mm.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to reciprocate and trying to do the same. That's all. Yeah, and yeah, we gotta run the race together, and yeah, it's easier to run with others.
Easier to run with others.
Yeah,
Right. But like
or
in
at
this,
least some people. Yeah, it's better than just being by yourself, basically. Yeah.
we still need alone time. I feel that, yeah,
Yes.
like during this time of COVID, a lot of people are alone. I was alone for a lot of time. Like you reached out, right? But like sometimes it feels very lonely. But through the alone time, like through feeling lonely, you kind of reflect on yourself a bit, on where you should
Yeah.
go. You know, I think it's a
Absolutely.
necessary time too to be lonely and alone, because
Yeah.
then you're forced to confront yourself. And then it's like, well, do I really just,
Mhm.
is this really all there is, you know? And then you, from there you kind of like think, no, it can't be, this can't be all there is, and I need to do better. At least, but I guess some people, they've given up on doing better, but like for me it's just like, I don't know, I'm still trying to forge ahead. Yeah, still trying to figure out what to do. And so I guess podcast is one of the ways, right, to do it. Yeah. What, so with this idea of like food to eat, right? I was hungry and he gave me food to eat. And then we do this for others. I guess that's a Christian virtue, right? It's something that it's written in the Bible, and but when you do it in life, right? It's
Mm,
meant to like that's meant to translate into real life in a way,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I feel that a lot of I guess it's debatable whether this idea of free will or human rights came from Christianity in a way, or like or whether the Enlightenment and this
Mm,
idea of like checks and balances government, Western civilization is built on some sort of Christian value. What do you think of that?
mm.
Is Christian values part of the foundation stones of Western civilization?
I mean, you know me, Austin, a little bit, so you know I'm of the view that there should always be a separation.
Church and
Uh,
state.
but
Yeah.
if you ask me, in all honesty, I would say as long as the person who is right doing the task have some kind of recognition that there's a higher being, yeah, that person's action should always reflect something of God. Yeah,
Mm,
that could apply to a Christian virtue. That could apply to, uh, you know,
non-Christian
yeah, all
society,
kinds
or
of things.
right.
But there's as long as the person is of that view, I believe any decision that person makes, any that applies to right. If that person is in power, the decision or the laws, the rules that a person establishes should reflect something of that.
So I guess we'll end our first podcast here.
Is that it? Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Unless you want to say something. Is there anything, questions, topics you want to talk about?
Oh no, no. I'm just wondering. It's my first
Okay.
time here. Very happy to
Oh,
be here.
awesome. Well, thanks, John. It was a pretty deep conversation. So
Okay.
hopefully we'll
Okay.
have another one soon. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks again for having me. Let me know if you want to have it again. I'm more than
Oh,
happy to support and to see what can bring to the table.
yeah. All
Okay.
right. Thanks, John, and good night,
Yeah,
everyone.
no problem. Good night.